Day in UCMC. Now we will hear the information on the OSCE SMM activity and security situation in Ukraine. Alexander Hug, Deputy Chief Monitor of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. You're welcome to take the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your interest in the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission. Let me update you on the latest developments regarding the security and humanitarian situation as observed by the SMM. For the third consecutive week, our monitors continue to observe relative calm. In Donetsk region, the situation in and around Horlivka remained tense, but even at the remains of the airport, we observed fewer firing incidents than in the previous week. In Luhansk region, we observed no incidents at all involving heavy weapons, and there were days when no ceasefire violations were recorded in the Luhansk region at all. On Monday this week, we observed no violations in Luhansk or Donetsk regions. This decline in the level of violence can only be welcomed. I share the concern, however, of those who rightly insist that more needs to be done to make it sustainable. For despite this apparent lull, there is a clear and present danger of re-escalation. In the first place, the SMM continues to be told of live firing exercises, some of them very close to the line of contact. This directly undermines the ceasefire as a whole. It creates uncertainty among forces on the other side of the line of contact and increases the risk of escalation. In the second place, dear friends, too many of the weapons that have caused death and injury to so many remain in what is supposed to be a security zone. Weapons shouldn't be there. In this last week, the SMM has observed military movement in government-controlled areas of Donetsk region and a heightened level of military movement in parts of Donetsk region outside government control, where we saw dozens of military-type trucks transporting supplies, equipment, and personnel, as well as weapons. These included tanks, mortars, and howitzers. We also observed military movements on both sides in Luhansk region. The mission has continued to visit the holding areas into which heavy weapons were supposed to have been withdrawn. Weapons were missing from sites on both sides. Indeed, the scale of this problem is such that the mission wrote to the Ukrainian and Russian heads of the Joint Center for Control and Coordination in Solidar to ask for an updated list of the locations of all weapons withdrawn under the package of measures agreed in February. Failure to provide this list directly undermines the effective monitoring and verification requested by the Trilateral Contact Group. The SMM is aware and concerned by this risk of escalation. This is one of the reasons why on Tuesday this week, the Chief Monitor, Ambassador Apakan, and I returned to Minsk to help coordinate the 11th meeting of the Trilateral Contact Group's work on security issues. During nearly 7 hours of positive and constructive discussion of the schedule for the proposed withdrawal, all agreed that the confidentiality of these discussions was vital for the sustainability of such discussions. An eventual agreement on the schedule include sequencing and overall duration, as well as on monitoring and verification modalities. The relative calm in Donetsk and Luhansk regions allows us all to focus a little less on the fighting itself and more on the impact it is having on those caught up in it. I will mention two issues in this respect. The signatories of the Minsk Memorandum anticipated one of these in particular, the threat posed by landmines, unexploded ordnance, and the explosive remnants of war. More than a year ago, they prohibited the installation or laying of mines within the boundaries of what is supposed to be a security zone, and insisted that all mines previously installed or laid should be removed. These stipulations have largely been ignored. Recently, the rate of casualties related to landmines, unexploded ordnance, and booby traps has continued to rise. In Volnovakha, for instance, the deputy head doctor this week informed the SMM that there had been 10 civilians injured by explosive devices in the area in the past 3 months. On the other side of the security zone in Donetsk, SMM monitors visited the main morgue recently. There they saw the body of a middle-aged man who, they were told, died after a package he found on the street in Donetsk on 16th of September exploded in his hand. Landmines, unexploded ordnance, and explosives remnants of war threaten the lives of civilians, hamper the use of fields for agriculture and the repair of gas, water, and electricity systems. Those who have laid and installed these mines in contravention of the Minsk agreements must remove them. As a first step, they should take clear and immediate steps to map all affected areas, to mark and fence off all such areas, and to provide assistance to the victims for whom they are and will remain responsible. The OSCE Special Monitoring Mission has started to contribute to this effort and has issued awareness campaign material such as leaflets like this one, or other material that can be hung up in schools and other public places, such as this calendar, which clearly indicates and alerts the general public to the risk that these mines and unexploded ordnances causes. A second issue that I want to bring to your attention is winterization. In addition to the lack of food, sanitation, and medicine, people living close to the line of contact continue to tell our monitors of their concerns relating to the lack of reconstruction and insulation materials for homes, schools, and other buildings. Many schools across Donetsk regions are in urgent need of repair. The SMM visits, for instance, a school in Alexandrivka, located practically on the contact line. Almost 200 children attend this school. Destroyed or damaged residential property makes living in such areas difficult, if not impossible, and in light of the upcoming cold season, the repair of these properties becomes ever more urgent. As well in Alexandrivka, some 20 people whose houses were damaged or destroyed in the fighting live in the same school basement I have just mentioned. In government-controlled Hranitne, for instance, 500 out of the village's 1,500 houses have been damaged by shelling. Many windows remain broken and roofs are still damaged. Damage to gas supply lines and increased gas prices create additional problems. Another challenge is the lack of coal being delivered from so-called DPR-controlled to government-controlled areas. Price inflation of key energy resources such as gas, coal and wood are of particular concerns for the population in the Luhansk region. Dear friends, with the lower level of violence, we note improvements in conditions on the ground that allowed the SMM to monitor and facilitate a window of silence for the repair of electrical lines in the so-called LPR-controlled area of Vesela Hora and Sforte. On a positive note, starting on 22nd of September, the SMM helped facilitate access, including through the facilitation of a local ceasefire, for transporting humanitarian aids to the villages in the Donetsk region. These include Staromachalivka, Oleksandrivka, and as well government-controlled Krasnohorivka. Also yesterday, for the first time since the downing of our unmanned aerial vehicle over DPR areas on 31st of August, we are flying once again a UAV which strengthens our monitoring and reporting capacities. Yet, we haven't been returned the wreckage of that UAV that was downed at the end of August. I can also inform you that the SMM monitored the blocking of 3 crossing points to Crimea, namely Kalanchak, Chaplinka, and Chombar in the Kherson region. Organized by the Crimean Tatar self-governing bodies, the Mechelis. While no trucks were allowed to pass, passenger vehicles and pedestrian traffic were allowed through in both directions at all 3 crossing points. The situation was occasionally tense, but there were no incidents that we registered. Finally, the usual update on our mission numbers. As of this week, with the arrival of a new batch of monitors, the SMM has now 543 monitors, 71 other international staff, and 260 Ukrainian colleagues working along us. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your report. Are there any questions or clarifications? Чи є запитання або уточнення? Yeah, we have one question. Yeah, the question will be in Ukrainian.
Good afternoon. 112 channel. How do you assess the intentions of LPR and DPR to organize elections according to their scenario on the date they figured out that it should be held, and how could it influence the escalation of the conflict?
The OSCE Special Monitoring Mission is not monitoring the election process as such. This has been done by the independent OSCE institution of the Office of Democratic Institution and Human Rights based in Warsaw. The OSCE will continue, however, to monitor the security situation, and any deterioration in what it observes will be reported publicly, as we have done before, throughout the period and across Ukraine, including in those areas not controlled by the government.
Дякую. Наступне запитання, будь ласка. Так, прошу.
Вікторія Світлова,
Politica publication. Do I understand it correctly that you do not see any proof that heavy weaponry is withdrawn from the zone of conflict? And could you clarify, who did you talk to get the list of the weapons that are to be withdrawn?
Thank you. Let me clarify this, and this is important. According to the Minsk agreement, as they have been agreed in September and February, heavy weapons need to have been withdrawn a long time ago away from the contact line. We have asked both sides to provide us with initial baseline data, which we have initially not received. However, we continued throughout the period since February to observe that heavy weapons have been stored in storage sites away from the contact line on both sides. Recently, however, we have seen that these weapons started to disappear from these sites, and we have seen weapons appearing near the contact line where they shouldn't be. And we have also seen, as I have outlined today, the movement of such weapons along the contact line. We have asked the heads of the Ukrainian and Russian delegation to the Joint Center for Control and Coordination Center in Solidar to provide us an updated list of the weapons they have stored in conformity with the Minsk arrangement. Failure to provide us this list will interfere with our ability to effectively monitor and verify the withdrawal of heavy weapons. This has to be distinguished from the efforts that the Security Working Group of the Trilateral Contact Group at the moment undertakes in Minsk, which is to encourage the sides to find an additional arrangement so that smaller caliber weapons, including tanks, can also be withdrawn from the contact line. I can confirm that we see tanks and smaller caliber weapons as well as heavy weapons still at the contact line, and what concerns the heavy weapon, this is in contravention and in violation of what the sides have agreed to do, namely to withdraw these weapons away from the contact line. The mission's verification effort is meant to ensure that these weapons are not just moved around, but that they are withdrawn and remain withdrawn. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Чи є ще запитання? Якщо запитань більше немає, то...
Once there are no more questions, thank you. Our next briefing is at 2:00.